Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy.
Okay, so today we're going to take us a trip to Brazil.
Do you have your passport?
I sure don't. We've taken us illegal trips.
Hey, I have my passport.
Well, congratulations. I do not.
That was a new one. I realize you told me already at the start of this. I can't get distracted and I don't even know what we're talking about. So there ain't high hopes. Proceed.
So our time frame is the wide span of 1968 all the way to 2003.
Well, hot damned.
Okay. Yes. Our killer for this week is Pedro Rodriguez Filho. And Filho means junior, and depending on the articles that you read, they use that as his last name. But he is a junior, and his father is a senior. So, and in Portuguese, Filho means junior or son. So, he's known for being a Brazilian vigilante serial killer. So, I will not be doing triggers. Other than this case, it's a little gross, but it's nowhere we haven't been before. And, fun fact warning for you, Claire, I got some fun facts throughout this here case. So the fun facts, however, I find to be more interesting facts rather than scarring. Let's cannonball right on in with them fun fact time. Little tidbits of information, just so that you have your mind wrapped around what Brazil was like during this time period. It was whole dictatorship through the 60s, the late 60s into 2000. There were a lot of poor areas, a lot of slaves that ended up being freed, but they could not afford the nicer houses, so they had like shacks, and the police were corrupt, and they would go around literally killing poor people. Rather than help improve the poverty level, they would just murder the poor people, or they would murder like the gangs, or the police were just not good people. Granted, I realize you can't say that about all of them. I'm sure there are some police officers that were not shady, but for the majority, they were some shady fuckers. They were violent.
I don't feel like for Brazil, if you've watched enough of the movies, that it seems like a lot of countries have some corruption issues. Not to say we don't either, but the police being easily bought off.
They weren't even bought off. The government supported the brutality of the Brazilian police.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. It was, at least here, the government is like, yeah, you can't do that, you know? Right. But in Brazil, they fully support the brutality of the police. It was also certain areas, just like anywhere else, are overrun with gangs and violence. So you have violent gangs and then corrupt police. So not a very great atmosphere for raising children. So that was one of our fun facts. Another one is the prison life. So Brazilian prisons are literally one of the most shockingly violent prisons anywhere in the world. Even by the standards of hardened criminals, the prisons are overcrowded, they're understaffed, and they are quite easy for the gangs and drug dealers to take over and run the prisons. Gruesome murders are a common daily occurrence while there. The guards will literally give the keys to the prisoners to their own cells because the guards were too scared to walk through the hallways. If you go online, you can find videos of inmates playing football, or what we call soccer here in these parts, using decapitated heads of other prisoners as soccer balls.
That's disgusting.
So, prison life, also not the greatest. Another fun fact before we actually started in this case is in Brazil, less than 10% of their murders are actually solved and brought to justice. It's a lot of unsolved, that is. It's a lot to take in. Prison sucks. The police are corrupt. Gangs everywhere. And if you done get murdered, the shit's not getting solved. You got your mind hole wrapped around that?
Trying to. Still visualizing the soccer ball. So
yeah. A little bit about Pedro. He was born on a farm south of Minas Gerais in Brazil. I know I butchered that. My Portuguese is not the greatest. But he was born October 29th, 1954. Pedro was the oldest of 7 children, and his father was Pedro Rodriguez Sr. His mother, her name was Manuela. His father worked as a school security guard. He was a calm, nice man when he was sober, but he was rarely sober at home. And when he was drinking, he was an extremely violent drunk. You know how we talk about head injuries in correlation with becoming a killer?
Mm-hmm. He played baseball.
Well, Pedro was doomed from the start. Not only is he being raised in a very corrupt area, but literally before birth, he was doomed from the start. His father was beating the living shit out of his very pregnant wife. He beat her so badly that when Pedro was born, his skull was bruised and permanently deformed from his father kicking her in the stomach repeatedly.
I think that's the first time we've heard of a head injury while they were still in utero.
Because it's not super common. Like, you want to talk about the amount of abuse that this woman endured. I'm impressed that she turned around and birthed 7 children with this man because,
What?
yeah, he's the oldest of 7 kids. But he beat her so badly that even as an adult, you can see the divot in his forehead.
Do you notice a correlation between your head injury stories? They always seem to have change holders in their brain hole.
Yeah.
This isn't your first divot case.
I know it. But the deformity was right where his prefrontal cortex is. So another fun fact for you, Claire, or more informational, the prefrontal cortex regulates our thoughts, actions, emotions, impulse control, problem solving, etc., etc.
Where's your conscious live?
Basically, where your Jiminy Cricket part of the brain is. It works with the limbic part of the brain, which is your flight or fight.
For a second, I thought you said it's the limp dick side of your brain. I was like, I do not have a Jiminy Cricket in there with a flaccid penis or a hard one.
Oh my gosh. Clean out your ear holes and listen. No, the limbic part of the brain. Okay. So if there's a
Still
situation.
heard it. But go ahead.
Okay, so flight or fight part of your brain.
Fight or fart.
Oh my gosh.
Flirt.
So if there's a situation, these 2 parts of your brain work together to make us figure out whether we want to say, hell yeah, let's throw down, biatches, versus, oh heck no, I ain't getting my ass whooped today. And then you turn tail and run. Those 2 parts of your brain work together to figure out a situation. Make sense? Well, Pedro was born with that part of his skull caved in.
Compressed.
Yes. So like I said, he was doomed from the start. Back to Pedro's childhood and the shaping of this future serial killer. Pedro's father obviously was abusive, and he would regularly abuse Manuela and Pedro, as well as Pedro's younger siblings. The area, like I said, that he grew up in was filled with gangs and violence, so there was no escape for Pedro. He only went to school for 9 years, and then he went to work because he was trying to help his family provide. You know, it's part of his duty as the oldest son was to help provide a living to his family. There was also a saying in Pedro's hometown that God must exist because the devil certainly does. So Pedro's only bit of solace was to go visit his grandparents. His grandfather taught young Pedro how to fish, swim, harvest plants that he taught him how to plant, and he taught him how to hunt. He also taught him how to fight. His grandfather would take him to work with him at the local butcher's, and he taught Pedro how to carve up the animals at the butcher shop. So he was trying to teach him life skills. And then his grandmother, who dabbled in black magic, taught Pedro that drinking the blood of the animals that were killed and he slaughtered would help give him strength. So you've got grandpa teaching him life skills and grandma teaching him the life skills are great, but you got to drink this here blood to become stronger.
What's with you and the blood drinkers, too?
I don't know. So Pedro worked several small jobs. Pedro would work several small jobs, and he hunted in the jungle to help provide for his large family.
What was he hunting?
Animals. I don't know.
Well,
whatever you kill.
Figure that one case I did where they were mushroom hunters.
So he's hunting animals to slaughter to provide meat to his family.
I'm going to put it down in my brain hole as a mushroom hunter.
Sure, you do that. Now, Pedro saw the world as very black and white. It was either fair or unfair. There was no gray for him. There's no in between. It's either right or wrong. Period.
Hmm.
So, when Pedro was 13, he and his older cousin were fighting over a horse. His cousin punched him in the face, and then
Are you sure
Pedro
you read
said,
that right?
"What do you think I read incorrectly?
Maybe it wasn't a horse.
A whore? You think they were
You
fighting
don't
over a
know.
whore?
You don't
I don't
know.
know.
You seen Pretty Woman? It happens.
Not with a 13-year-old.
You don't know.
Okay, so they were fighting over a horse. One of the boys borrowed the horse and didn't have permission, and the horse was the other boy's, and he needed it to go do whatever it was. They were fighting over a damn horse, okay?
Even if you
But,
interchange the word, they can still fight it. It was his, not hers.
okay. His cousin, who was bigger and older, punched Pedro in the face. Pedro was pissed and was like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And the cousin laughed in his face and punched him again. Right.
Kind of hope that fella doesn't die, because I can get behind the I will kill you. Whack! Shut your pie hole.
Right. That's pretty much how that went down, throwing some laughter. But Pedro would bide his time. He decided to wait. He waited for the prime opportunity to prove he was not weak.
He spent the time working out.
Perhaps. While he was helping his grandfather, his cousin and his grandfather were working at a sugarcane factory. Pedro shoved his cousin into the sugarcane press. Like, he waited till his cousin was right there,
What does
lined
that have
up,
to do
and
with
shoved him.
strength? He could have done that way sooner.
So his strength was being patient and waiting instead of just in the moment, because that didn't work out for him. So he had to be smarter, if you want to call it that, to figure out how to get his revenge. I don't know if you know what a sugarcane press looks like, but it's basically like two giant rollers that you push the cane through, and it juices the sugar out, the sugar cane.
Might be a surprise to you, but they do that in Alabama. You can tour it and even take a sip of that fresh processed sugar cane.
Get you a diagnosis of diabetes along with it.
The tour also includes a free meter and test kit, as well as an insulin pen.
Pedro says as an adult that was the first time that he ever thought of killing someone. However, in that moment, he could only get his cousin's arm into the press, which mangled his cousin's arm all the way up to the shoulder.
Oh, shit.
Immediately. And Pedro then tried, instead of helping his cousin, tried to shove his head into the sugarcane press.
Well, he's already pot committed at this point, so if he can, no witnesses, no crime. If his head gets smushed, he can't say that he didn't fall.
The cousin lives. His arm is completely amputated. And Pedro's family opted not to press charges because they relied on Pedro for his income and his hunting skills in order to provide for his family.
You can understand that. They're in a pickle.
I guess.
You punish the boy, you punish the whole family, and they turn will kill over.
And now they've got somebody with a mangled arm. Well, yeah.
Yeah, now they got hospital bills.
But this is what piqued Pedro's interest. And he really was curious what it would feel like to actually full-blown kill somebody. When Pedro was 14, so he was 13 when he did that. Now at 14, his dad was fired from that school security position for stealing food from the school's kitchen. And Pedro was mad because the deputy mayor is the one who fired his dad after 12 years of working there. And it's not like he had a history of issues. It was 12 years. It was 12 years of no issues, and they only suspected him as the thief, but they had no proof, and they fired him.
Well, so I think we've done a case before where somebody got fired because they were taking stuff out of the trash can, that even though it was thrown out kind of situation, but they don't allow that. It's still considered stealing, because then people will start throwing stuff out that's not meant to be thrown out, just so they can say that they got it out of the trash.
Yeah. Well, not only did he fire his father without any actual proof, and his father was saying I don't know what he's talking about. I'm not stealing anything.
Did he?
I'll tell you in a minute. Well, I don't know. It's never confirmed. His dad denies it. Not only did he fire him, but the deputy mayor also branded Pedro Sr. as a thief. So he couldn't find work anywhere else. So now you have a large family who has one member that's permanently disabled, and now another one who's been fired and cannot get work elsewhere.
Who may or may not have
So,
actually stolen stuff, though.
yeah. So 14-year-old Pedro packed up some supplies and headed to the mountains for 30 days. But instead of calming down, his anger mounted. Pedro survived off the land for that month, and when he returned from the mountains, he was hell-bent on revenge for his family. He wanted to defend his family's honor, and so Pedro stole his grandfather's shotgun and waited in the bushes for the deputy mayor to pull up in his Jeep. I don't know if the man was leaving or leaving work or going to. It depends on the article you read. But either way, Pedro waited in the bushes. At the first opportunity he got, he shot at the deputy mayor. The terrified man hopped out of his vehicle and started running. Instead of chasing after him, Pedro took a deep, calming breath, aimed the shotgun, and blew the deputy mayor's head right on off on the front steps of the city hall where the deputy mayor worked. Pedro, still unsatisfied, a month later, tied up and tortured the day guard, who was the one that was actually stealing from the school. While bound and scared, Pedro made sure his victim knew exactly why he was going to kill him. He then shot his father's coworker for letting his dad take the fall for his theft. Can I point out, he's 14. He's just killed 2 people and tried to kill his cousin. Pedro is 14 years old. He's on the run. He decided to go hide out in a southern part of Brazil, Greater Sao Paulo, with his aunt and uncle. And they decided that they would perform a ritual to protect him. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I said they dabble in the black arts or black magic. His aunt explained that in order to have true protection, he would have to fulfill his destiny.
Which is?
Now, Pedro
smush that
believed
cousin's brains.
Pedro believed that his destiny, his purpose in life, was to avenge those who have been wronged or that he felt were bad people. So he looked at himself as it was his job to spend the rest of his life taking out the bad people and getting revenge for those that couldn't get it themselves. So
Does
he's
he
like, sure.
Realize perhaps he is one of them there bad people?
He thinks that if you are killing bad people for doing bad things, that makes you a less bad person, was his logic. So he agrees to these terms, and his uncle sent him to gather the necessary supplies for the protection spell. He goes and he gets a coconut, and he had to remove the fibers on the outside of the coconut. Then he was to fill it with gunpowder and insert a wick, which seems very hazardous to me. I'm not sure what they do with it. Nonetheless, that's what Pedro had to go get. The next item he had to retrieve was 7 string beans and a black cat.
Cat?
At midnight.
Like the animal?
Yes, a black kitty. At midnight, Pedro was told to kill the cat. Pedro then was instructed to drink.
Shit?
I don't know. Pedro was then instructed to drink the cat's blood and baste himself with its organs.
Oh, I hate to keep connecting these dots, but you and the basting of things. Disgusting. Foul individual.
So I said it's nothing we haven't talked about before.
Did he fuck the cat?
No. There is no bestiality that I am aware of.
Well, you also said there weren't triggers.
The trigger was that we've talked about the majority of this stuff before. The basting, the drinking of the blood. So next, Pedro was supposed to fill the cat's body with the seeds or beans and bury the cat. Yeah. So he gutted the cat, drank its blood, rubbed the organs all over himself, and now he's supposed to pack the cat's body with these seeds and then bury it. All while people were dancing around him in a circle, chanting and playing the drums.
I definitely attended different parties.
A week later, Pedro was sent to go dig up the cat, remove the beans from
Ew!
the
Oh, tell me he doesn't eat the beans.
from the decomposing kitty. I
It's
kind of wish he did have to
disgusting.
eat them, but his uncle then threaded the beans into a necklace, and Pedro was instructed to never remove the necklace.
I'm sure he smelled
So
wonderful.
at
Now that
this,
these here have fermented in the corpse of that cat.
yeah, his
No, you know what?
uncle,
This was not a. This was a protection, real seriously, because no one will come within 60 feet of him. They'll smell him, and then this was also to protect the cousin because he'd also catch a whiff of him, upwind or downwind. You'd smell that bog of eternal stench coming for you.
he'd know to run. So now he's got this necklace that his uncle threaded, and Pedro, again, he's only 14, truly believed that he is invincible. Pedro needed money, he needed food and survival type things. And this is when he falls in with a gang and would begin to rob other drug dens and start stealing from drug traffickers or what he called bad guys. And in the process, he's also killing these drug dealers. Pedro seriously claimed to become invincible. He wrote an autobiography as an adult where he claims that police, now remember, they're the corrupt police officers that would just shoot first, ask questions later kind of deal. Pedro claimed that police and gangs would open fire at him and the bullets would just go straight through him, leaving no mark. Was never injured, but was regularly shot at.
I feel like perhaps the people shooting at him were real bad shots.
Perhaps. And Pedro claimed that he saw himself as a defender of the weak, a vigilante for all who chose to do harm to women, children, and animals.
What about his? What? He killed the cat, and he maimed his cousin. Maybe look
Yes.
inward.
In his head, he was a child, and that cousin done him wrong first by punching him.
His paw done him wrong by leaving him a smushed brain hole.
Oh, we'll get there. Much like the story of Robin Hood, Pedro was adored by the poor. They would hide Pedro if the police or rival gangs were nearby because they looked at him like he was their savior and they wanted to keep him safe because he's literally on a regular basis. Like, we're talking one person a day he's killing. He's 14. At this point, he just kind of keeps doing his thing, going around stealing from bad guys and killing them. And he met and fell in love with an older woman who was the leader of the gang that he was in. Now, not to sound sexist, but it never dawned on me that in the 70s that a woman would be a gang leader in another country, because I thought women were more looked down upon. But nonetheless, she had her own gang. At this point, he's 15 years old. This grown-ass woman, who is a pedophile, takes his virginity. He moves up in the ranks in the gang, which angered his fellow gang members. And eventually these jelly belly men decided they wanted to join a different gang. But first they were willing to go take Pedro fishing. And in reality, they planned to kill him.
I was going to say, his radar should be going off around then. We want to go to a different gang. But first.
I don't think they announced that they wanted to go to another gang. But first.
You don't have to give your notice?
Apparently not. Somehow in the process of attacking this teenager, these 3 grown men lose the fight. To save his own life, Pedro ends up killing all 3 of them.
He really was working out.
He really was. And while he's doing his gang thing, so this story, again, it's in Brazil, so some of the stories are conflicting, and I think it has a lot to do with the translation of news articles. Not on my part, just in general, because a lot of what I read...
I don't think you'd be translating them if you don't know Portuguese.
So a lot of them say that the woman that he met, the gang leader, and this girl that he falls in love with and ends up marrying or being engaged to, that I'm about to tell you about, are the same person. But I don't think they are. I think they're 2 different people. Mainly because if you read his autobiography...
they're 2 different people?
If you read his autobiography, it sounds like they're 2 different people. But he meets this girl named Maria Olympia. Pedro and Maria were young and in love. They began living together. From what I gathered, they got married, but they're both minors, so I don't know if they actually got married.
It's like on
But
Cold
Pedro,
Mountain when you just say, I marry you, I marry you, I marry you, and then you're married.
right. So Pedro's only 16. Maria finds out she's pregnant with Pedro's child.
Before or after they're married?
I'm not sure. I think it's one of those fast romances where they just kind of fell in love and one thing led to another. They're married and baby on the way. Pedro going around killing those gang members gained him a lot of celebrity in the news because people are starting to notice that this kid is killing or at least taking responsibility for killing all these gang members, right?
I
Now he's
imagine
got
the
his
other gang people aren't real happy about that.
they sure aren't. And the police aren't happy with it either.
The killer and his dog.
So Pedro's involved in yet another shady gang transaction with a major drug lord named
Question:
China.
what gang transactions are not shady? I just am curious. So
If they're eating a meal in a restaurant, I don't know. Anyway, so Pedro ripped off the gang leader by robbing him. He stole his drugs, guns, and then sold them to another gang for money.
that's not a good idea. I could see where he's not real worried because at this point he's bulletproof. But
Exactly. He
his
thinks he
spouse
is.
probably isn't.
So he did have a bodyguard for her to help keep her safe, which is why I think that she was somebody different than the gang leader, because you would think that she wouldn't need protection from a 16-year-old.
But he
You know what I
seems to be
mean?
dabbling in the whole multiple gang affiliations.
Right. This leads to a lot of chaos in his life, and Pedro comes home one day to find Maria and her bodyguard both murdered. She was
Couldn't have
7
seen
months
that one
pregnant.
coming.
She was 7 months pregnant when she was brutally slaughtered. So Pedro swore on her grave to exact his revenge. But with
He's
so many
still doing
enemies,
his revenge.
I know it. But this time his revenge is specified to finding her killer versus before it was just for bad
He's
people.
avenging. Everyone's avenging. He's just a very vengeful.
Mm-hmm. With so many enemies, though, how do you figure out who's responsible? Like, he's going around just
Everyone is
pissing people
responsible.
off, right? By the way, Pedro's still under 18 at this point.
But he's not
So,
even owning his own responsibility in this if he weren't so disloyal to all his other gang members by switching sides and flip flopping and flim flamming that he kind of brought all this on himself.
a little bit, yeah.
And he
Obviously,
knew
finding,
it, or he wouldn't have gotten his wife a bodyguard.
yeah, I know.
He didn't get the most expensive one, clearly.
So, obviously, finding his pregnant love murdered set Pedro off. He went on a revenge killing spree. He hunted down, kidnapped, and killed every member of any rival gang one by one, but not before torturing each one of them to find out who possibly murdered Maria. And if they didn't know, he just fucking killed them.
Well, he
You're
had
a
a lot
bad
of free
guy. I'm
time
just gonna
now.
pretty much. According to Pedro, he was killing at least one person every day. And if the rare occurrence happened that he did not murder someone, he couldn't sleep. He was too stressed out and he couldn't shut his brain off. He needed to murder in order to quiet his brain.
And the neighborhood.
That's what it is. You just figured it out. You done figured it out. You're a genius, Claire.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, he drank the blood of every victim to help give him strength and show respect for that ritual that was
so
performed.
I'm just no, ma'am. It's going to be more along the lines of the days he didn't kill people as the days he was in bed sick from too much iron. You think he ever spit up and thought he had a bleeding ulcer, but he just forgot he drank some more blood at breakfast?
I sure don't. So one day, a woman approached Pedro when he was sitting at a bar just drinking his sorrows.
That was not sorrows. That was B positive.
She approached him, claiming to be the ex-wife of that gang member, China. She told Pedro that China put the hit out on Maria for him stealing those drugs and guns, and that China would also regularly beat her, and she showed him scars and all this, that, and the other. But she also told Pedro that China and a handful of his men would be attending a wedding here shortly. So she just provided Pedro with the why, who, when, and where. Now,
But
it was
he
never
doesn't know
confirmed.
her.
Yeah, it was never confirmed that China was involved with Maria being killed. I feel like that was a long list of people that did not like him. So, seeing as how his own gang members tried to kill him, I don't know. But Pedro decided he'd gather a few of his cronies and go attack his rival at this wedding. But first, Pedro did threaten his men not to harm any women or children or else. But any men at this wedding were to be shot. Pedro killed 7 men and injured 16 others at this wedding, and it would later be called the Red Wedding Massacre because of all the blood. Pedro became infamous among the crime world because China was a major boss, like reach the castle in Mario Brothers and fight the big boss kind of
I
boss.
was
And
gonna
this
say I didn't remember you saying a castle, but
no, but he like
and he looked like a dragon.
so at this point, Pedro becomes known as Killer Petey after that.
What? That's the
Yeah.
best name that they could dub him.
Well,
Killer
it was Pedrino Matador, which translate to Killer Petey. And even the police, these corrupt police, feared Pedro because he didn't give a shit. At least the other gangs, they ran from the police. But Pedro does not. Like, he literally, that part of his brain that's being compressed, seriously has him with zero give a fucks. He tattooed on his arm, "I kill for pleasure." And then on his other arm, it said, "I kill for love," along with the name Maria.
He needed a hobby.
He's got one. He needs a different one. Pedro murdered more than a dozen criminals while under 18.
That's why the police left him alone. They're like, I've been able to take vacation twice this year.
I think he gets on the police bad side by taking out a major drug lord guy because they're corrupt. I think they were getting kickbacks from China in order to stay off China's back. But we'll get back to that. The serial killer also created his own moral code and only killed people who violated his own personal moral code. A few months later, he found out that his favorite cousin was pregnant and her baby daddy refused to marry her. So, Pedro, having just lost the love of his life and his baby,
married his cousin.
Pedro decided if that baby daddy wanted to be a deadbeat dad, then he'd help him accomplish that with a bullet. And he ran around chasing his cousin's boyfriend and shooting at him till he killed him. Now, the reason I believe the police were now angered by Pedro's actions is because on May 24th, 1973, the police finally tracked Pedro down. I think that they were mad because he killed China. So now the police have found Pedro. A massive gunfight ensues. Pedro wakes up in the hospital, handcuffed to a hospital bed. He'd been shot several times by police. So I guess he done missed some of that blood drinking from somebody because he now got shot. It took over a month for Pedro to heal from his gunshot wounds in the hospital. Like, he was under arrest, but he had to stay in the hospital to continue to recover. The entire time he's being interviewed by the media, he's surrounded by the police. Like, he is so famous at this point because of all of the things that he's doing. The regular people find him to be a hero. The bad guys want to see his ass dead. Once he's healed up enough, he was sent to jail to wait his trial. Pedro was only 18, about to be 19 years old, when he was arrested for the first time for murder. That's absolutely crazy. Because you figure killing the deputy mayor out front in City Hall, they knew it was him, but they didn't go after him. Like, nobody gave a shit until after he murdered this major drug guy, China. Does that make sense? That's why I think that the police had it out for him at that point, because he slowed their money. On Pedro's day in court, he was charged with only 18 murders, and Pedro was pissed. He was absolutely livid because not only was...
It was in the hundreds, you son of bitches.
No, you're laughing, but he was pissed because of how low his kill count was. He told the courts, I've killed over 100 bad guys. And then he was pissed more because he was only found guilty for 14 because they couldn't prove 4 others. He was
You know
so
what?
mad.
They should have been like, you know what? Never mind. We recall. It's been 2.
Right? So after he's found guilty, he was given the option. Does he want solitary confinement or better known as protective custody, or
The firing
be
squad.
mixed be mixed in with the general population? You know, all them their gang members that hate Pedro because he's going around killing the other peoples.
Seems like an irony of sorts because gang members kill all their other gang members anyhow, so to be mad at somebody else for doing the same thing they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So Pedro, of course, he chose Gen Pop. It was like taking a kid to a candy store and saying, have at it. There's literally no consequences
And
other
plenty of
than,
lollipops.
ew, other than death. Keep in mind, he thinks if he's drinking their victim's blood, that he's protected by that their ritual spell. And the whole no consequences, I'll explain that in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. So Pedro ended up being sentenced to for those 14 murders. He was given 126 years in prison.
That's it?
So he was given 126, but guaranteed to be out after 30. Crazy, right? Like, is your mind blown? Like, what is the
Yeah.
point in this? I
We're going to give you
that one
1,000 years, but you're going to do 30.
exactly. Like, it's just the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. However, that led to me doing a little bit more research, and it was mainly in part because the life expectancy at that point was like 40. And with the prisons in such disarray, a lot of the prisoners, if not most, did not survive their full sentencing to begin with. So it was basically a death sentence. While
Keeps
being
drinking all that blood, it would be anyway.
right? Oh, ugh. He's lucky he didn't get sick with some sort of disease, is what I'm saying, not just iron poisoning or cooties. But while being transported to the jail with 2 other inmates in a police van, Pedro was handcuffed. So were the other 2 inmates. By the time the officers reached their destination, Pedro had somehow managed to kill one of the inmates without even alerting the officers. When he was asked why he murdered the other man, Pedro said he killed him because he was a convicted rapist.
His
While
moral compass has never wandered.
unless it pertains to him. Now, while serving his sentence, Pedro was jumped by 5 other inmates in the prison yard in front of all the other guys. They was outside for playtime, and these 5 fellers decided it was time to kill Pedro. Somehow Pedro killed 3 of the men and seriously injured the other 2, like hospitalized them. Now, having this insane attack witnessed by all, Pedro's celebrity status grew in every way possible. The media celebrated this Avenger of the Week, and the criminals absolutely feared him. He took on 5 grown men and killed 3 and seriously injured the 2, and then drank their blood in the middle of the prison yard. Can you imagine that sight to witness?
There,
No wonder it scared the fucking piss out of everybody, and there's no guards anywhere because they're too scared to come out of hiding. Pedro was basically untouchable at this point, and again, he's only 18. Brutal, brutal guy. But his mom, Manuela, and his grandmother would visit Pedro every week. Pedro would go on to kill 47 more prisoners, one of which would make headlines. But first, before we talk about any of that, we're going to jump back out of the prison life and go talk about the Rodriguez family, the rest of his family that's on the home front. Pedro Sr.'s family told Pedro Sr. that Manuela was cheating on him. Pedro Jr., the one in prison, explains that in their culture, a wife cheating was unforgivable and that often led to murder. Which I kind of blinked at because I'm pretty sure cheating is a no-no everywhere, especially from women in other countries. Like, I don't ever think that a wife cheating is celebrated. But that's just me and the rest of the world.
it ain't good.
But Pedro Jr. insisted that his mother was super religious and faithful to Pedro Sr., but it was too late. Pedro Sr. had brutally murdered Manuela with 21 vicious whacks with a machete. He then dismembered her remains. No comments on that? Okay. So, from what I read, Pedro Sr. only tried to murder Pedro's brothers, but it could have been all the children. Again, much can be lost in translation. It could have meant
You said he
Pedro's
was the oldest,
siblings.
right?
Yeah, Pedro's the oldest. And he's 18. So these are younger children. But Pedro's siblings escaped with the help of a neighbor, and Pedro Sr. is arrested. A judge allows Pedro Jr. to attend his mom's funeral because it was near the prison that he was being held at. A week later, Pedro's aunt, his dad's sister, brings him a cake in prison. I didn't know you could do that, but whatever. It's Brazil.
You probably can't anymore.
Pedro was like, yeah, thanks. And
Share
Pedro
this with
was
your friends. Wink.
Pedro was super paranoid and makes a smart decision. He's not going to eat that cake. Instead, he gives it to a few stray dogs that were prisoners' pets. Again, also didn't realize that was a thing, as well as a few other inmates. They start vomiting. A couple dogs die. Like, this cake was fucking poisoned. His aunt tried to kill him.
Or she just wasn't
During
very
this,
good at the baking.
that's possible. So
Their
during
fridge
this
went
time,
out. She thought it was still good.
keep in mind, I told you that the prison guards let the prisoners pretty much do whatever they wanted because they were scared of them.
Or they're going to
Now,
punch their own tickets anyway.
right. Pedro arranged to be able to visit his father's cell. Pedro stabbed his dad 22 times, one more stab than what Pedro Sr. inflicted on Manuela. This is the same man who Pedro committed his first murders in honor of. But Pedro had a flair for the dramatics. Simply stabbing his father was not enough. He had to count out loud each stab to assure that he got each 22 flesh-tearing stabs in.
Well,
But
it
that
wouldn't
too
make
was not
sense
enough.
it wouldn't make sense to wait and count afterwards. But, oh,
Or count them
one
in your
too
head.
many.
No,
One too many.
So, but that still wasn't even enough. Pedro then cut a hole in his father's chest, stuck his face in his body,
That was
and
not
bit
where I
out
thought this was going.
a chunk of his father's still beating heart, then
I don't
ripped
believe
his heart
that.
out, chewed the chunk of his heart before spitting it out on his father's body.
I don't think he had an anatomy lesson, but I sure as shit do not think that he ripped open his chest cavity with his face.
So I think he cut right below the rib cage kind of scenario and reached up in there. But the claims say that his father's heart was still beating when he
No.
took a bite out of it. It's fucking disgusting. Either way, watching him take a bite out of his father's heart,
Anything?
beating or not, is disgusting. And then
No.
Pedro says in a report that he chewed it just to show the disrespect to his father before spitting it onto his body. It's gross. It's super gross. I guess if I was going to do triggers, I would have warned you on that one because that's pretty gross. But Pedro would go on and kill another man for snoring too loudly.
Maybe.
Sorry. Well,
I didn't realize your head was there. I mean, it was making a lot of noise, but it wasn't intended to be as hard as it was.
So Pedro killed another man because he believed the guy was spying on him during a conjugal visit. And I can tell you, I did try to
They
find.
didn't have TV.
I don't know who he was having sex with, but I guess because he was famous and you've got your weirdos that fall in love with the
Yeah.
serial killers type situation. And they seem to be really relaxed with their rules in Brazil that, he's getting him some and thought that somebody was watching. So he killed him. And then he killed another guy because he didn't
It
like
was
his
probably
face.
his aunt who made the cake. She was real
It's disgusting.
sorry. Okay.
This doesn't seem like the work of someone with a code of ethics, by the way.
So,
But like I said,
the snoring seemed a bit harsh of a murdering, but your face is ugly. He's starting to grasp at straws.
yeah. So Pedro would go on, like I said, to murder 47 inmates while in prison.
He just wanted
And
that
then
number higher.
he sure did. He wanted to make sure they got the kill count right.
And
He's like,
he's like, it don't
man.
matter. I'll be here only 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do
When
they
a
get the
criminologist,
reset? Or is it like it's an umbrella 30 years? Do whatever,
it's
you're
an
out in 30.
umbrella. It's an umbrella. It's the craziest thing. But a criminologist sat down with Pedro and she described him as a charismatic man who was joyful, casual, and intelligent.
That was the conjugal visit.
Pedro also said that he got a thrill out of killing other criminals, and he only killed criminals that he felt deserved it. You know, rapists, pedophiles, murderers,
Snorers.
ugly people. He also said that his favorite method of murder was stabbing or hacking with a blade. Seems real messy. But
They
that
wanted
handy
him to
dandy
keep reducing the population of the prison.
But that handy dandy little 30 years max law stood in place, and Pedro had nothing to lose, so he just kept on murdering. Got me another fun fact, Claire. Pedro continued to grow in popularity with that there public because he's murdering them bad guys. This media frenzy caught the attention of an author named Jeff Lindsay in
And
2003.
it's because he keeps being able to diddle his fan club.
Yep,
He has as many children as he does victims.
it's entirely possible. It inspired a book series and TV show. Now, after serving 30 years in prison, Pedro was sentenced to 4 more additional years for the 47 murders he committed while incarcerated. Pedro was released from prison on April 24th, 2007. When he was released, Pedro worked quietly as a night watchman or a housekeeper, and he also was an anti-crime crusader. With trouble never far away, in September of 2011, Pedro was arrested again and sentenced to 8 years for participating in illegal riots while in prison, threatening people while in prison, and illegal possession of weapons. So in reality, it looked like they were just looking for excuses to put him back in jail because those that were corrupt did not like that he was out after committing such crimes. And since he was still threatening people, they were like, yeah, let's just put him back. Turns out we'd got to feed less prisoners if we keep him there. So after 7 years of that 8-year sentence, Pedro was released for good behavior on December 10th, 2018. Pedro was a free man with 71 confirmed kills and an estimated of upwards over 100 murders under his belt. Most, but not all, were serious criminals themselves. Because as we did discuss, you can't done kill people for being ugly. After announcing himself to be retired from being a vigilante and
I hope that's not in
officially
your notes.
what?
Can't kill people for being ugly.
It's not. After announcing himself to be retired from being a vigilante and officially announcing he would not commit any more crimes with the stipulation
Because he has arthritis.
with the stipulation
and his stabby hand, and he don't like to use the weapons of guns.
He did with his first one. He done used that there shotgun.
But that's how he figured out he didn't like it.
Yeah.
It's because he used it wrong. He held it too loosey-goosey and it hit his shoulder. And he was like, fuck this noise. I can't hear my right ear and my shoulder is bruised to hell. We'll go to the stabbing. Well, I can have 2 knives then.
So
did you just make a noise to my snabby noise? That was the...
No, I yawned.
Oh. Well, fuck, Andrea. This is boring to you? You need a nap? So you're going to start doing the snoring?
So anyway, after, like I said he's not going to commit any more crimes or murders, had the stipulation, unless someone comes at him or his family, he'll behave. So he had conditional good behavior. Now, Pedro used his popularity to jump on the bandwagon, and he done became him a YouTuber, and he created a successful YouTube channel called Pedrino X Matador. He quickly grew to over 250,000 followers, And he would use his channel to
Those were
comment.
no, those were all his children. It was just a family reunion.
It sure was. So he commented on current crimes, campaigned against gang violence, and taught the public to not be proud of criminal acts. And he said,
Turns out you shouldn't kill the snorers and the ugly people. It's not
only them they're
nice.
criminals, and you should let the police do it because they done get to shoot them criminals and not have any type of repercussions.
Apparently, they
However,
get to shoot the poor people too.
yeah, I was
I
gonna
would
say,
use them as a
however,
role model.
they done leave the criminals alive because the criminals give them their crooked police some monies in order to leave them alone. And then they go down and kill the poor peoples. So, not the greatest. But Pedro said, these crimes which outrage us, filled with lies and put an end to the happiness of a person. He says he does not regret the murders he committed. So, no regret.
It would result in a different parole hearing in the U.S. for sure.
But he does regret falling into a life of crime. After being released from prison, Pedro had the I kill for pleasure tattoo covered up. However, Pedro created a lot of enemies. No, he still kills for love. He done said it. He put that out in the world. He said, you come after my loved ones, I will kill. So he will kill for love. However, so Pedro did create a fuck ton of enemies over the span of 55 years of killing people. That's a long span of killing.
That's why he had to retire.
55?
He was so tired. How did he not get any bloodborne pathogens is what I'd like to know.
You know what? I have no idea. I find
because
that
when I've had to retake that certification for the pharmacy, I'll tell you, it seems like everything's got hepatitis on it, according to them folks.
He was protected, remember? Around 10 a.m. on March 5th, 2023, Pedro was 68 years old. He was shot 4 times while sitting on his front porch. A female relative was there with him and said that while Pedro laid there dying...
Same aunt with the cake.
While Pedro laid there dying, one of the murderers told her, "This has nothing to do with you. Go inside and take your daughter with you." Though one of the killers then slit Pedro's throat. No arrests have been made. And fun fact, Claire, Pedro spent a total of 42 years in prison for murder.
I feel like they didn't do a whole lot of hunting for his murderer because you live by the sword, you die by the sword. It's amazing he lived through prison. So they're like, he was on borrowed time as it was.
Yeah. And my last fun fact for the day.
None of your facts have been fun.
That there 30-year max sentencing, that law was revised in 2019. So now instead of 30 years, it is 40. That is Pedro Rodriguez Filho. Padro, because that's the way it's spelled. Apparently done typed it wrong.
Clearly.
But
she don't do her letterings the same as everyone else.
I think it's mind-blowing that you can go to Brazil right here, right now, and go commit a ton of murders.
Might need to edit out this.
And you're only going to get 40 years?
Yes, but at that same point, it's a very harsh, murdery prison that you'd be going to that allows poisonous cakes to be entered into your jail cell also. So the likelihood of you surviving 30 plus years in that said prison, the odds are not in your favor. It's like the real life Hunger Games in there.
It sure is. But it's still crazy.
And apparently, if you sleep loudly, you can die. So, I don't think it would be recommended to go be a criminal in Brazil.
No, it's definitely not recommended. I just think that it definitely makes
death by machete
or
poisonous cake.
The drinking of the blood. Can you imagine that? Like if you were watching a movie, because I can't imagine it in real life, but if I was watching a movie with Jason and there was like a prison scene and a fight breaks out and then the guy kills 3 of them.
And then hold up. I need to quench this thirst.
Yeah, no. That would be hold
up. I need to remove his head or his heart with my head.
And take a bite? Like, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting, but
Hold up, I changed my mind. I'm not hungry. No,
it's disgusting.
sure fucking
Well, he
is.
apparently, I had to cut out that part of at his mother's funeral. He did say he would eat his father's heart when he said swore his revenge, and that is the reason for doing it, because he promised his mother's grave that that's what he would do.
I feel like even in her death, she was like, son,
Please don't. That's disgusting.
don't eat your aunt's cooking either, because that's what punched my ticket. Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the